In this episode of the ITProTV podcast, we take a look at some of the speakers from the BSides Delaware Conference, as well as an interesting story about FEMA and Hurricane Irma, all coming up now on the ITProTV podcast. Hello and welcome to the ITProTV podcast. I'm your host, Peter Van Rysdam, joined as always by Don Pizzette. And today, in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about BSides Delaware. Don and the team were able to take a crew up there just last week and film some great interviews with some different people about security, some of the vendors, some of the speakers. And last time we talked to some of the people putting on the event, and this week we're going to focus on some of the people that were actually speaking at the event. So first of all, Don, did you get a chance to enjoy any of the sessions this time?
You know, when I go to these conferences,
you're just in your little spot.
I am. I never get to actually go and sit in on the talks, and the talks are oftentimes the best part of the conferences. And so sometimes we miss out on that, but thankfully, since we're friends with the people who are putting on the conference, it made it a little easier for us to get access to the speakers. So we had several times where we would interview people oftentimes before they got up to give their big talk, so we kind of got a little bit of a preview. Other times after they had given their talk. But it was a neat chance for me to hear, firsthand what they were going to be talking about or what they thought was a big pressing issue. And it was pretty neat. And there were a few conversations that were super neat that were off camera. I'll kind of insert some stories as we go through this episode. But it was just really neat to talk to these people, just incredibly talented people that came and spoke to help increase awareness and get the word out about security through the industry.
Yeah, and that's really why we go to these events too, so we can kind of take the cliff notes from these topics and share them with the people that necessarily or can't necessarily go to all these events. And I know they're happening all the time, so hopefully we're able to bring you that information so you can stay in the luxury of your home or your car and listen to this podcast. But the first interview we got was with Joe Klein, who's with Disrupt 6, and he talked, he referenced the movie War Games right off the bat, which made me really excited. I loved that movie. But he was talking about the cyclical nature, that's a tough word, cyclical nature of attacks. You try it.
Yeah. So
I'm done.
The cyclical nature of attacks? Easy. So Joe Klein, who is another person I absolutely want to get down here to the studio to film content with us. But talking to him, I mean, he is a wealth of knowledge and has been involved in IT security and really just IT in general for quite a long time. Very passionate about IPv6. In fact, his company, Disrupt 6, their focus is on IPv6 network security, that a lot of people are rolling out IPv6 and they're not taking the extra measures to make sure that it's secure like we do with IPv4, and it's a shame because IPv6 has so much more to it. So he was actually getting out and giving a talk, and I won't steal his thunder, about some interesting attacks that you can perform on some of these voice assistants, things like the Amazon Echoes with their Alexa Assistant or Siri, Google Assistant. There's some attacks that use tone shifting to be able to basically exploit them without you even knowing it's going on. So pretty neat stuff, and it's an example of people thinking outside of the box to come up with a new way to attack something that would otherwise be secure.
Well, that's great that we've got people thinking outside the box like that. Hopefully it's the people on the good side thinking outside the box and looking after that stuff. But let's go ahead and take a look at that interview here. So here's Joe from Disrupt 6.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another ITProTV interview coming at you from BSides Delaware 2017. I've said it before and I'll say it again. One of the greatest things about these conventions and conferences is a chance to meet people in the cybersecurity community. And there are so many interesting characters, and I don't think I could find a more interesting character than Mr. Joe Klein. Joe, thank you for joining me on the show.
Thank you.
And we had a brief conversation earlier. I'm going to call it brief. We probably talked about 10 different things. You are just a wealth of knowledge. But before I get ahead of myself, would you mind introducing yourself to our viewers and telling them a little bit of your background?
My name's Joe Klein. I actually grew up in high school in Claymont, Delaware, which is interesting. Since a little bit around that and forward, I've been doing nothing but cybersecurity, offense, defense, assessments, chief security officer. I've played pretty much every role for the last 35 years in this domain. I currently am the CTO of a company called Disrupt 6. We create custom security products for IoT and the next version of the internet, which is called IPv6. And I'm also a hacker from the MIT domain, which means that we attempt to find solutions. We're not actually criminals. We're trying to find solutions and trying to fix some of the things that are broke around the world. And otherwise, enjoying the conference.
Now, you say enjoying the conference. Joe's actually here in a bit of a working aspect also because he is giving not one, but 2 talks here. A lot of the speakers we've interviewed are only giving one, but you are an overachiever. So let's talk a little bit about your talks. Which one do you want to start with?
We can talk with the first one. One of the big challenges with any field is to actually have history. We have a lot of people, the vast majority of people are new to this community. So in the last 4 years, we have people that don't know the history of cybersecurity, where we've gone, mistakes that we've made. This 2-hour presentation later today is specifically to help people understand what choices we made. Let me give you a good example. There was a presentation 51 years ago in Atlantic City from a gentleman from Rand Corporation. And his presentation was to talk about security and privacy in networks. That was a long time ago. Even I'm not that old. So he presented it, and nobody found it for 17 years. A director that wanted to do a movie basically found this information, and he used this as a framework for his movie.
Wow.
The movie, War Games. Okay, so we didn't actually see this as an issue. So at that time, we had President Reagan, and President Reagan was a big movie buff. And one of the things he got to do is he got to see all the new movies before anybody else did at the White House. That's kind of cool. And he saw War Games. So this was during the Stark Talks, and which is Star Wars is what they used to call it. But as he was presenting and as he was listening to his generals, he said, "Stop. I saw this movie last night. Can you tell us if our systems can be compromised like this? Get back to me as soon as you can." Took approximately 9 months, and they went, "Yes, we have a problem." So that was, that was in the 80s. That's how long ago that we have forgotten that, some of the lessons that we should have learned, essentially.
I said it in an earlier interview, it's always easier to learn from someone else's mistakes than to learn from your own.
Absolutely.
But history is full of things like that occurring and then us just making the same mistake over and over and over again. So while learning history might not seem like the most sexy thing, like, the threats are changing every single day, something new is coming out, why would I want to learn something old? It's a lot of the old stuff that's coming back to bite us, right?
Yeah, we actually have a cyclical nature in cybersecurity. DDoS, malware, using Microsoft Word and other products for phishing, different types of phishing attacks. IoT is just really the same cameras that were compromised 8 years ago. We didn't call them IoT because that didn't have a cool name for it at that point. So yeah, we see the same things come back over and over and over again. My presentation is to help them understand that here are some lessons that we've learned, here's some things that we can do. As an example, in the late 90s, it became more important to buy blinky light boxes to solve all our problems. But at that point, the federal government had created something called a security engineer, which was an individual that could actually identify what the real risks were and make the decision on a vendor versus a vendor actually pushing product on them. And we lost that, and we're actually getting back to that process. Also, the maturity of an organization. We have no method to say, well, you're a CMM level 1, you're a maturity level 1, or you're a maturity level 2. If you're 1 and 2, you have a 99% chance of getting compromised. We can't do that right now because we became in love with blinky lights. Okay, so that's actually the second part of the presentation, is some of the lessons learned from when we implemented it, what some of the successes and failures of that particular process, and we see this actually coming back.
I used to work with Cisco Iron Port devices. Cisco acquired them,
yes.
and it's exactly like you're saying. There was a stack of them. There were 6, I think, and if you didn't have all 6, that was exactly what the salesperson would hit on. Like, well, why don't you have the spam filter, the email checker, in each one? And it was a good solution, but it wasn't designed to be the only solution. There's really no substitute for having humans involved in the process, right?
So did all 6 actually have a single letter and it spelled Cisco?
And they were all different colors, so it was pretty in the rack, pretty expensive too.
Nice.
All right, let's move on to your second talk, because I know this is one that we've actually been filming some IPv6 content back in the studios. Right. It is, I'm going to say, it's a cutting-edge new technology that's been out for over 20 years. But we're only recently seeing a real big uptick in that, right?
Yeah, let me reintroduce myself in that domain. I'm a fellow for the IPv6 forum and the IoT forum. One of the things we found was that, a little story from Windsurf, okay? When he was designing the original IPv4 internet, he went, how many addresses should we allocate? Oh, let's figure out there's about 200 countries. Okay, that's good. And we're going to have one network for their government and one network for their commercial, right? That makes sense, right? Yeah, perfect. So all the numbers were based on that thought process. Things have changed in the last 40 years. Okay, sometime around 1994, an alert came up by the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is a group that actually engineers all the new protocols and so that all the systems talked correctly together. They actually found that we were out of addresses. The problem with that being out of addresses is like being in a big town. You can get the building number, but then you have to get the floor number, then you have to have the apartment number, and then if it's being subleased, you have to know who's inside it. Well, we created all these technologies to support that because we only had 4 billion addresses, and we ran out of addresses for 4 billion 8 years ago in most cases. So that's a real problem. So now that we have IPv6, IPv6 had a World Day in 2012. And what that World Day was the official rollout of it. From World Day, we went from less than 1% in the United States. Actually, it was 0.6 to be precise. Yes, I track that kind of stuff. To the U.S. now is almost 40% IPv6. That's all different carriers and all your products since 2008 support IPv6. Now here's the problem. We have all of our products support IPv6. We have a big percentage of those systems are already on the internet. And the third problem is many of the security products don't know how to actually address a security risk. And that's a real problem. So for the last 15 years now, I've been helping with the standards, creating better security, working with companies to create it in their products. But a lot of organizations wait until the last minute to apply these. And unfortunately, in the security domain, that last minute can take 9 months to implement some security defense. So this is a real problem. So the big issue with IPv6 today, though, not only is it every place, but with IoT, each device can have a unique address, which means now we can establish a trust, just like between you and I, looking at you, I know it's you, you know it's me. I don't know it's you that's in an apartment building on a specific floor in a specific building, and you don't know the same thing about me. Okay, so this actually resolves that issue. It allows us to create a better level of trust within the infrastructure. The second thing is, you probably don't know it. Do you have a mobile phone?
Certainly do.
Okay. All the carriers went to IPv6 on the mobile devices, and the reason why is it provides better battery life on all the IoT and phone and mobile devices. So if you can get, I don't know, anywhere from 4 to 30% better battery life, would you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes sense.
Absolutely, and those are the kind of features that come out. So my presentation is really focused on how do we defend using this new network. I have now reviewed everybody's products, everybody's slides, everybody's presentations for the last 15 years, and I found that they're not actually taking advantage of IPv6 to create better defenses. To give you a good example, when you put a computer on the network, on the internet, the V4 internet, how fast does somebody have a chance to scan it?
It's almost instantaneously.
Yeah, currently the whole internet can be scanned in less than 6 minutes, which means that you only have 10 microseconds before somebody scans you, the potential of somebody scanning you, and less than a second before somebody compromises. I'm not that fast. I don't think you are either. So therefore, to defend that speed is a real problem. I have servers up on the IPv6 internet that I use myself. They've never been scanned. They've never been compromised, and I even made sure the security was very low on it to see if anybody could ever get in. They can't even find it. Okay, so because the address space is so large, it's a difference between going to downtown Philly during rush hour on a nice warm day in June or something, when everybody's packing the streets like this, versus being dropped into maybe Wyoming in a 500-acre piece of land where you're the only one there. So essentially, it's very, very difficult to find, and that has features that make it easier. Now, the reason we want this for IoT devices is we reduce the risk if somebody actually wants to attack you. They're going to be running around all that acreage. They're going to be very noisy to try to find you. Well, then you can go, no, you can't come and mess up with my system. And even if they can do it at 100 microseconds, you've got hours before they'll actually find a specific device. So there's actually a better defense profile for people that use IPv6. So we're going to be talking about the features within IPv6 to defend it. There's actually 28 features that I've designed and designed tools around. I'm just going to talk about 5 of them that people can implement today and fix problems.
And I know IPv6, it's not a magic bullet, right? It's not going to immediately solve all your problems if you don't actually participate in that. And I started reading about IPv6 years ago in the early 2000s, and have been just dying to get it implemented. We have it at the office, and at home, I only got IPv6 support from my carrier last week. It really has taken a long time to get that, but I knew once I turned that on that the devices inside of my house would all get public addresses, so that you don't have the little protection that Nat gave us, that you have that exposure. But I also knew that my firewall needed to be configured for that. That I've seen a lot of firewalls where they almost all maintain a separate rule table for IPv6.
Absolutely.
And a lot of them are set to pass all traffic by default.
And here's what the problem with it is. NAT really didn't provide us any security features. What provided us a security feature is called a statefulness. Okay? Did my communications go from outside to inside? Well, I don't allow anything to come into my network unless I explicitly say it. Okay? NAT didn't help us with that. And then I can block things that go out when I initiate a connection out and make sure that somebody else doesn't try to come in after I've made that outbound connection. Okay? The problem with it is a lot of the consumer grade firewalls don't have full stateful firewall or firewall rules, and they're not real simple. They should be really simple. If I plug in a computer and my system says, I have a new IPv6 device, the firewall should say, okay, this is an authorized new IPv6 device. What's the default profile that you want on any default device? We don't have that in our consumer grade products, and it's real frustrating. I mean, we both have to fix our parents and our friends' devices all the time, Please fix it. Okay.
Yeah, and it's easy to think about it from our perspective as people who work in the security community, our viewers, the same thing, that it's easy for us to look at it and say, here's what I need to do to fix that. But your average person, they don't know that. They don't even know that this exists, right? They just buy the router, or they get assigned the router by the phone company, and they stick it in, and that's that. So it is a big area that's that we can.
Absolutely.
So those are your 2 talks that you're going to be giving, which both sound great. But let's talk a little bit about your company, right? You mentioned some of the work that you're doing in the outside, the private sector.
Yeah, the company's name is Disrupt6, and the goal was to create products specifically for the IPv6 domain. That includes custom intrusion detection systems. Currently, we have the only threat intelligence for IPv6. We can identify In some cases, right down to the block of where the bad guy's coming from. That's a real advantage. And we can also give you places where you don't want people to go on the IPv6 internet. So we have blacklists and we also have whitelists. If you don't do business with a specific country, here's the address range that you can say, I don't talk to this, and if anybody tries to talk to this, then that's bad. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time, and considering, unlike IPv4, which is only 4 billion addresses, we're trying to monitor, you ready for this? 360 undecillion addresses. That's a lot of addresses. So it's 360 with 20 zeros.
It's a significant amount, and it's a big. It's designed to not have to be replaced again for a long, long time, right?
The life expectancy is between 40 and 60 years until we have the next generation technology, and there's already work on that technology, but that technology's probably 25 years away before it can be scaled.
If it's taken this long to see acceptance of IPv6, it'll take even longer for something else.
I know.
I am glad to see that we're finally getting some uptake on it, though, and organizations like yours are available to help us make sure that transition happens in a secure manner.
Absolutely, yeah. We've come in and we've helped organizations find malware on V4 just by turning off V4 and only allowing V6 as an example. We've helped data centers, we've helped set up security operations centers. It's been a lot of fun to watch people's eyes open to say, wow, I can do this now and I can defeat the attacker easier. That's kind of cool.
You know, I hadn't even thought of it until you just said that, but most malware, they have hard-coded command and control servers that are almost all IPv4 addresses.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, we've been doing that for a long time. And because of that, we also can tell what software they're actually designing it in. If it does query IPv6, I can tell you what libraries and approximately how it was designed, which is something we couldn't do with V4.
Awesome. Well, I know for the viewers out there, if you want to see the Joe's talks, they're exciting, engaging. Joe's an amazing storyteller. Be sure to check out, well, if you're here, check out the talk. But if you're not here, the talks are being recorded. They'll be a part of the BSides content that's provided up later, so you'll get a chance to watch those later on. We'll try and link to those in this video. And then as far as your company, if people want to learn more about Disrupt 6 and what you do, where's the best place for them to go?
Disrupt6.com. Best way to do it, or look up Joe Klein, IPv6, and you'll receive videos and links to me from presentations that go back 30 years.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and it's been a pleasure. If we had more time today, we could probably go on talking about all sorts of things. Joe's a real interesting person, but definitely be sure to check out his talks. And again, thanks for spending time with us.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen out there, that's it for this interview, but stay tuned because we've got more coming at you from BSides Delaware 2017.
All right, thanks for that interview, Don. I'm going to go ahead and run home and turn. Or can I turn off my Alexa from the app in my phone here?
I don't think you can. I think the whole intent is that it always stays on, always listening. And speaking of listening, right before Joe and I did that interview, he did a little demo for us. Now, I don't go on these trips alone, right? I take a production team with me, and I had two of our directors were with me, and I'm in my early 40s. They're in their early 20s, so big age gap between me and them. And Joe took his phone and he played a sound. Okay, and we all heard the sound, so everybody could hear that it was working. And then he changed the frequency of the sound. And when he changed it, Aubrey and Tanisha, who were with me, they could both hear the sound, and I heard absolutely nothing. It wasn't like it was quiet. I heard nothing. And what Joe showed us was that he could take his voice and record it into his phone and say, Alexa, order a pizza and have it delivered in an hour. Oh, my apologies to everybody I just ordered a pizza for. But he could say that, and then he could tone shift it. And when he did that, they could hear it. Aubrey and Tanisha, they're younger, they could hear it. I couldn't hear it at all. But an Amazon Echo could hear it just fine, or a Google Assistant, or Apple Siri, they could hear it just fine. And that was kind of the premise of the attack he was talking about was, hey, you can be sending voice commands to somebody's house, and as we start doing smart locks on doors, telling the system, okay, Google, unlock the door. And that's the kind of thing that can happen. You wouldn't even hear it. So interesting attack vector, something that definitely has to be dealt with or sorted. And the vendors are all taking steps to do identification and all. But it was a really neat demo. Joe was pretty cool about
That's
it.
pretty funny. At my daughter's fourth grade science fair, one of the kids had a project about that, where they had the headphones and said they basically just interviewed people and said, "Can you hear it or can't you hear it?" just to confirm the ages and stuff. And sure enough, I couldn't hear it. My daughter said she could. I assumed she was lying, but now it's good to know that she shouldn't have been grounded. So I apologize. So next up, we have an interview with Andre, who is with SecureWorks, and he was talking about CSOs, so Chief Security Officers, and when they know they're in over their heads. So.
I had a great conversation with Andre, and SecureWorks, if you haven't heard of them, they're a managed security company. And so they help out organizations that either just don't have security staff or don't have a lot of direction. They have more work than they have people. So they bring in SecureWorks to help them. And they do just a ton of different things. So when I talked to Andre, what I focused on there was not so much like what they did, although we talked about it a bit, but how a company understands they're at that point. Like, when do you realize now's the time I need to start outsourcing, or no, I can handle this in-house, or I should be able to take care of this? How do you even recognize when you're at that point? So it was a good chance to talk with them, and they were the ones who were actually running the Capture the Flag at the conference. So they were participating, they were active, they were kind of doing some neat stuff there, and in turn, they go out in the real world and they help companies do it.
Well, I assume the first step is admitting you have the problem, so that's important
right.
to help out there. So let's go ahead and take a look at that interview here with Andre.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another ITProTV interview here at BSides Delaware 2017. I'm Don Pizzette, and we've been talking with a lot of people about cybersecurity related issues, but I wanted to take our interviews and bring it back a little bit more to the business side, that if you are responsible for security for your business, what are the things that you're supposed to be doing? What are the areas that you're really responsible for? And when do we know when we're in over our head? And I had a great conversation with Andre Robitaille a little earlier, so I roped him in to do an interview to help us kind of walk through that process. Andre, I thank you for joining us. And before we get started, how about you introduce yourself and kind of tell our viewers who you are?
Sure. My name's Andre Robitaille. I am the Global Director Solutions Architecture at SecureWorks.
All right, and SecureWorks, for our viewers that haven't heard of it, can you tell us just a little bit about the company?
Sure. SecureWorks is one of the leading managed services providers. People who are looking to outsource the management, the monitoring, watching for the threats that are out there in the world on their devices. That's the bulk of what we do. We also have a fairly large security services group, so penetration testing, red teaming, GRC help, incident response. We're one of the leaders in that space as well.
Excellent. And for a business, we'll take outsourcing, kind of stick it behind our ear for a minute. But let's assume that I'm working for a company. I have a limitless budget, just all the money I could need, and I'm supposed to be responsible for security of my data, keeping my customer data safe, keeping my employee data safe. What are some of the responsibilities that a security officer would have these days, like to make sure their data is safe?
Well, quite a few, to be honest with you. From a general architecture standpoint, one of the situations that we find way too often is that people are trying to protect everything, whether that's a whitelist security model where everyone wants to actually see, if they see a way in or out of the environment, then they block that. If they see an application that they do or don't like, then do they block that? And it's an endless game of cat and mouse. It is extraordinarily expensive. And what we tell people is, you go back to protecting the data. Find out the things that people want to either steal or take down because it's important to your business, and protect those things with all the resources you have, because the limited budget's not going to allow you to touch everything. So going after that is probably the bulk of it. And past that, what things can you do yourself to a reasonable degree? And what things do you need to outsource because it doesn't make sense for you to hold the top level expertise?
And I think a lot of these areas, some of them are easy to address ourselves. Some are really hard to. So, for example, an easy one might be, would you say, like vulnerability assessments? There's a ton of tools that provide that for us. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do that. Although, I guess you have the argument that not every tool is as effective as any other one. So what, in your opinion, what are some of the tasks that are easiest for us to address ourselves without outside help?
Well, there's a point where it becomes kind of a relative piece of what do you feel comfortable doing. When people come to us to ask us to do an individual one-time vulnerability assessment, for instance, running a vulnerability scanner and then processing the results, figuring out what to patch, and so on. There's no reason that if that's part of your daily tasks of security, if your job is to watch, vulnerabilities that of viruses and things that you see in a McAfee console, you can perfectly run a vulnerability scanning tool. They're not expensive. You push the button, you get the output. The business side of that's a lot more complex, of dealing with individual business units, convincing people to patch things, reporting up to CISOs and board level and that sort of thing. That's a lot more difficult. There are documents such as NIST that spell that out perfectly. I think the last version is renamed Patch Management. Read it, implement it, follow those instructions. You probably don't need us for that. If you're a large organization, then you may need to outsource the help on how to design that program, or if you decide you want to have somebody else run it, there are places like us that will do that as well. But having a one-time, please, we're not sure what's out there, push the button, scan it, and then remediate it, it really makes almost no sense to have an outsourced company like us do that sort of work. The expertise level is not required because you're just dealing with a tool.
And I like the way you put it, because I'm describing it in like a one-size-fits-all solution, but that's not really true. That for a small business, it might make more sense to outsource something versus a large business where they might have the staff that can address that. But even for a large business, as their technology needs grow and as their data sensitivity becomes more critical, then they're going to have different needs there. So a hospital might not have a huge staff, but their data is super sensitive versus I don't know, like a mailbox store where they might have a ton of employees, but their data is just not that sensitive aside from basic credit card stuff. So the data that they're securing is certainly going to influence how we're outsourcing, how we're doing other routines like that. Do you think that, like in general, the companies that you've worked with, do you find that people are doing a good job educating their employees on what their security responsibilities are, educating their IT staff to implement secure solutions? Do you find there's a good uptake in that right now?
In some areas more than others. If you're looking at the base level of knowledge, at least in the U.S., if you're looking at the base level of knowledge of, say, how to do vulnerability assessments and what are the basic concepts around penetration testing, you're seeing more and more what I call non-pro staff, people that don't do penetration testing as part of their permanent job, showing up at conferences like these, like BSides, going and taking training through various courses. You find more standard people doing that as part of their training, where a lot of the findings that we still come across are the larger scope things, and especially at the application layer. Developers still cannot figure out how to deal with basic coding techniques and doing it securely. They need to understand this more than anybody because they keep reintroducing the same problems from 15 years ago. So we still find application security to be one of the biggest messes. And when people do outsource to have somebody test it, a company like ours at penetration testing, they will tend to shop around and go with the cheapest person. And a lot of times that they call it an app test, but really it's just another version of an automated scanner. Something you can do yourself, scan, and see the output, versus, well, where are their business logic problems? How can I manipulate this? How can I combine multiple different vectors to attack your application? Because it's still easily the easiest way. If you take our highest, toughest guys, our senior men and women, if you take our red team that'll get in any way they can, applications, web applications especially, are still the primary, easiest vector, unless, of course, we're walking in the front door, which is even easier, but that's kind of a cheat.
Yeah, we've talked about this in some of our shows before about how developers, they really focus on features first because they've got a deadline, security second, or maybe even security third or fourth. It's not first and foremost in their mind, and so these vulnerabilities keep popping up. Now, let's switch into opinion mode, not necessarily fact mode. Do you feel like companies can effectively pen test themselves?
No. Now, that's a pretty tough one to answer concisely. I think that they should have somebody that understands that. The person, there should be a technical individual, not a CISO that really understands it, but an actual person that does understand some of the techniques. You should be sending somebody in your organization to a DEF CON, to a DerbyCon, to a BSides, to those sorts of things. You should be sending these people to training on how to break into these things, because somebody has to be the internal champion. Even if you do outsource, you have to have somebody that can interpret the results internally, answer the questions that you may get from other departments or from management and so on. But the level of expertise that somebody can have, even if I take the best person I have as a pen tester, somebody who's been doing it for a decade maybe, even that one person is not going to have all the ideas. When we do a penetration test, you almost always have 2 people minimum working together because they have different ideas. They'll bounce things off of each other. They can kind of have different strengths that they bring to the table. When we do a full-size red team engagement where we're any means necessary, we're talking about 4 to 6 people that are going to do this work together as a team. And even when you have that, if you have internal teams do it, they're only going to know your environment. They're not going to know what does and doesn't work, what really is a false positive or not, versus a team that does this. They did yours this week, they did another Fortune 50 last week, they did a mom and pop shop the week before, they did a Fortune 500 the week before. That day in and day out, this is all that they do. This is all that they train on. And they really can get a level of perspective and expertise that you can't just get internally, but you still need some of that internal expertise or you're really going to struggle.
Now, I know in your role with a previous organization, you actually built some of these teams like that. Is that a really challenging thing to do, to find the right people that work well together to get more than one vision of how an application works, or do you find that you can pretty much stack any security professional together as long as they think a little bit differently?
So it was actually for SecureWorks that I most recently did this. So it was just a different part of the organization that I built their red team and hired a lot of the pen testers. And there's kind of a 2-part answer there. You can throw money at any problem. You can always find somebody if you're willing to pay out is more than the next person. But when it comes to how do you discern the talent, that to me is the real struggle. If you're a manager and you're trying to hire this and you don't have the past expertise of what does a good or bad penetration tester say when they're interviewing? How do you call somebody on their nonsense? Those are things that discretion makes it really, really difficult to hire the right person. One of the things that we did that really made one of the biggest impacts for our ability to hire, so the end result, if I work backwards, is that it became referrals. We bring a great person over and they love it here and they tell their friends because the community is very tight even still. Professionally, I think there's probably 10,000 people who would call themselves penetration testers, give or take, or something related. So tight community, comes to all these conferences, gets to know each other, and they recommend their friends. But you take a couple steps before that, and you're trying to show people that you're the kind of place that really gets it. These are people that are very, very, very passionate about what it is that they do for a job. And they're not going to want to go just work at a place because they cut a paycheck. They want to know that they're listened to, and more importantly, that places are going to make changes based on the things that they found. It's a very kind of ethical group of people, that in some ways, I guess more than others. But they're ethical in the sense that I found something, this company that I'm loyal to, that I want to fix. Why aren't you fixing it? And the business bottom line may say that it's not that important, but that's something they're really going to struggle with. So convincing people that you're the kind of place that values them and values their contributions is a really important piece. For us, our first step in doing that was actually coming to conferences like these and sponsoring them, competing in the CTFs, the Capture the Flag events, getting to know the people, showing them that SecureWorks actually cares. And it's important to SecureWorks that this community is here, and these people are here, and we value them. If a company was going to go in to hire a staff, they've got to be able to do that. Find a really trusted member of the community. And we actually had one that left our company to go work for somewhere. He started pulling in trusted resources. He had the discernment to know if they were good or bad because he knew them personally or worked with them. And he had the clout to say, I think this is a good place to work. I think we're going to be valued here. Come work with me. So it's not just throwing money in it, but that does really help. But it's also the value.
All right, so if I work for an organization and I feel like I'm in over my head, either I don't have the funding that I need, or I just don't have the resources to properly secure the network, or I just worry that I don't have the right knowledge, right? We could engage with somebody like your company, with SecureWorks, that if we wanted to do that, what does that engagement look like? How do you kind of start out that relationship with a customer?
talking to a salesperson, which for a lot of people is a little bit of a struggle, right? But as a former salesperson myself, I can tell you one quick trick for any of the viewers out there. If you tell a salesperson no very directly, they will go away. They only have so much time in the day. So that little trick, knowing that. Getting engaged with one of our salespeople and bringing in their sales engineer most likely to help scope it and really understand. But make sure that they understand. If they're only asking you, whether it's us or anybody else, if they're only asking you, how many IP addresses do you have? Oh, you want a pen test? Oh, we do that. If that's the level of engagement that you're getting, ask to talk to somebody else there or at another place, because they should be questioning you. They should be trying to understand the problem you're trying to solve. Once that happens and you go through that sales process and you get the engagement going, who are you talking to there from a consultancy standpoint? Are they asking questions about your environment, or are they just trying to say, what's in scope? Can I go get domain admin? That's the usual goal you hear, domain admin all the time. I can tell you, after doing this literally thousands of times as a manager and as a director here, if you take a report at the end of it from a third party or from yourself and you think that, well, look, they got domain admin, I'm going to show this to the board, or I'm going to show this to another department, and they're going to care, you are wrong. I use the imagination test. The second you require somebody to use their imagination and why it matters to your business, it's over. So that consultant or consultancy group should be starting to ask, what are the critical pieces to your business? Not email, but like, if it took down a system, it's a problem for your business. If it stole data, it's a problem for your business. If it got really latched on to something you couldn't get out of your environment, it's a problem for your business. Your consultant should be asking those questions. And after that, how much time are they spending actually making progress on that? If they're just going to run a scanner and give you the output with a couple bit of false, positive verification, it's the wrong place. You want somebody who's going to do kind of a goal-based test to go after that big stuff and show your organization what could a real bad threat actor do, and prove it.
Yeah, but I think it's important also to remember that it's a two-way street, that we can't just say, I'm going to outsource it all and not do anything, that we have to actively participate as well, because if we get a report that says, here's the problems that were found, somebody's got to fix those, right? We've got to be ready to act on that. If we don't act on the information we're getting, then it kind of defeats the purpose of doing it. With the organizations you've worked with, do you find that most people don't have an issue getting in there and recorrecting, or do you find that they do a risk assessment and they find that it's not worth fixing? Do you see that a lot? What's it look like out there in the field?
That depends on the last time they had a real breach. There's usually a big pile of money for about a year after a breach where you'll see a lot of changes happen. I've actually had people quit as senior penetration testers because they get sick of going to the same company year after year, finding the same serious vulnerabilities that never get fixed, and like, you know what? I don't want to work and do this job anymore. I hate it. I'm going to go to actually work for these companies and then make changes. Yeah. And then they do that for about a year and then realize the money dries up and then they want to come back. But no, it's about not even half and half, but let's say half and half. It's 50-50 shot. Are they going to fix it or not? And really that comes down to, is the CISO valued? Do they have a seat at the table? And are there outside actors, like a board of directors, for instance, that are asking those questions? Why isn't this getting solved? Your CISO or whoever's at that level should be able to have maybe a monthly or quarterly time where they go up and present to the board, here's what we found, here's what we did about it. If they don't have that, you may be working for the wrong organization.
Yeah, and I do think a lot of organizations are starting to wake up to this, because the breaches are getting not just more significant, but they're getting more frequent. I mean, it is just every other week some major company gets compromised, and Equifax, I think, is serving as a great big wake-up call to a lot of organizations that we need to think about how sensitive our data is and how damaging it would be if that data was compromised. And that's a real risk that every company faces. So it's great to have organizations like yours that can help. And I keep talking about like outsourcing individual things, like a particular task, but it's not just that. You mentioned design, that sometimes we can solve the problem ourselves if we have the right infrastructure in place. And you guys assist with that too, right? Helping us to design a solution to be able to manage our own security?
We do. We have what we call our security design architecture group that will actually go through and help deal with the way that people are structuring their whole environment. We still find massive flat networks, even now. I was doing network administration 15, 20 years ago and was seeing it then, telling people to stop, and we still see it. So we do have a group that will help architect that, but it still does take somebody to go and make the changes. We also have a GRC group that when you're missing policies or you're not sure, is my department structured correctly? Do I have the right procedures and policies in place? I don't have a vulnerability management program. How do I build one? We have a team that will actually go and help people understand how to build that, build the reports to make that case up the chain.
All right, well, I really appreciate you spending time with us. Before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about your company. If people want to learn more or engage with you, where can they go?
www.secureworks.com is about the best way you can go. There are email addresses there or phone numbers that you should give a call to if you're looking to engage on some of that, and we can have somebody reach out to you and talk to you. And I now work in the sales engineer organization, so if you have complaints about them, my name is Andre, and you can find me all over the place to complain about it.
All right, now we know the throat to choke when a problem goes wrong.
I'll take it.
All right. Well, thanks again for spending time with us. I appreciate it, and I know our viewers do too. And for those of you out there in TV land, we thank you for watching. Stay tuned because we've got more interviews coming from BSides Delaware coming up next.
All right, another great one there, Don. And I know the last of the speakers you got to talk with was Nir Yosha from Threat Quotient. And so Threat Quotient, they're a pretty big company. I feel like I've heard of that name before.
Yeah, we actually talked with them. I don't think we did an interview, but we talked with them at RSA, and I know we saw them at Black Hat. But while we didn't interview them, their name came up a number of times because a lot of the threat detection systems were all saying that they supported the Threat Quotient feed. Right? And what that all stemmed from was this idea that we've got to have a way to learn about threats that are on the network so that our devices can respond and block them. That if you have an IDS or an IPS, how does it know what is attack stuff? And the people at Threat Quotient, they have focused on creating a system that allows us to share that information between devices, even if they're different vendors, so we get better intelligence across all the different devices. And threat intelligence has turned into like such a buzzword that you go to the conferences and you're inundated with sponsors pushing this, adaptive threat intelligence or threat AI and so on. At the heart of it, there's always a feed of data that's coming in, and the Threat Quotient guys are kind of leading that charge. So it was a nice chance to pull in one of their people, and Nir, very knowledgeable. He really understood the product and what's going on, and kind of filled us in on that and how important it is to exchange that information between systems.
Yeah, I know that's such a tricky thing when you've got companies that are in competition with each other. They don't want to share that, but I mean, these systems are only as powerful as the information that they're able to get on the attacks that are going on and share out with people. And I know Nir also mentioned, I guess his talk, he talked a little bit about some of the threats from some nation states out there. I think he mentioned North Korea and a couple others. So let's go ahead and just jump to that. Here is the interview with Don and Nir.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another ITProTV interview here at BSides Delaware 2017. I'm Don Pizzette, and we've been going around and engaging with a lot of professionals, learning a lot of great information. And one of the topics that I know has been hot on our list after RSA and Black Hat this year was threat intelligence. There's a lot of different devices and equipment and just organizations as a whole that are putting out great information. And we have this struggle of how to use it and coordinate it. And I had a conversation earlier today with a gentleman who actually has an interesting solution and a neat approach to this. So we're going to talk about it right here. Nir, thank you for joining me. And before I get too far, would you mind introducing yourself to our viewers and tell them a little about who you are?
Sure. My name is Nir Yosha. I'm a threat intelligence engineer. I work for a company named Threat Quotient. And like you said, I'm here to evangelize the threat intelligence platforms in general and Styx Taxi, which is we're trying to solve a problem within threat intelligence today. There are a lot of threat intelligence sources, and there's a lot of structured and unstructured data, but there's not a real way to convey and to share this information today. And so one of our goals is to create a standard, obviously blessed by our government, that can help organizations share threat intelligence in order to prevent the next breaches.
You know, when I was doing interviews at RSA, if any of you watched our coverage there, I actually made the comment in several of them that there were all of these threat intelligence companies, and there were all of these just firewall companies or antivirus where they would report information to a SIEM. And many of them just supported Splunk or some really expensive solution or they had some proprietary method for exchanging that data. And it made it really difficult to be able to even make that data useful inside of one company. You mentioned like sharing data between companies or government agencies. I know we saw that with the Department of Homeland Security where they had a lot of struggles with getting all the departments to share their data. So there have been some traction, some movement in the open source world, and that's where you guys have been participating a good bit as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So I mean, the SIEM is a great solution when you look into aggregating the traffic within your organization and the logs. But threat intelligence has a very specific terminology and a specific way of expressing information. And so threat intelligence teams are continuously struggling with getting this data using a SIEM. And so the solution that us and other companies are looking for is a sticks and taxi based supported protocol that currently is being worked with the Oasis group. They're creating now a second version for it. So it's going to be a Sticks 2.0. And this is an open source effort to create a standard that will allow two things. First of all, to communicate specific threat intelligence information from one machine to another, and also the ability to being able to represent it to the threat intelligence teams in a more meaningful way. So our solution ingests threat intelligence in many ways. One of them is Sticks Taxi, but the idea is to being able to have kind of a workbench for the threat intelligence analyst, so they would be able to enrich the information, cross-correlate it with the SIEM, and then identify whether there's something that they really need to act upon.
One of the big challenges that companies are facing right now is that the security world is changing so fast, and new exploits are being found every single day. They're being taken advantage of. These attacks are all over the internet. Even on our private networks, we see these attacks happening. And if you're running traditional, any kind of traditional intrusion prevention systems, they work on signatures, they work on knowledge that was gathered maybe from other customers, may not necessarily be timely. If you're a large organization, you might be able to generate a good set of threat intelligence with your tens of thousands of computers. But if you're a small, medium organization, it's hard to generate your own good knowledge. And it's always better, I've found in the security world, to learn from other people's mistakes than to learn from mine. And if we can share that information between organizations, that gives us the chance to do that, right? We can see where other people are seeing attack traffic. We can protect ourselves before we've even seen that attack traffic on our own network, right?
Absolutely. And we see it all over with our customers. The threat intelligence, when you think about it, it's information about adversaries and their activities. And there are specific criteria, the specific adversaries profile that can be collected, aggregated, and eventually shared with other companies. Now, threat intelligence has a lot of common when you're looking at specific verticals. For example, there's another open source organization, FSISAC, probably familiar with it, or NHISAC for the healthcare. So each one of the verticals or the markets has their own kind of set of adversaries that are targeting them. And a breach that happens in hospital A most probably going to have very similar characteristics in the hospital B. Same thing for banks, etc. So what we're trying to do is to take this information and share it among the specific verticals. One more thing is that when we look at the adversaries, some of them are more opportunistic. So some of them just trying to get all the, send the malware like WannaCry and, try to get as much as they can out of it. Even in those cases, there's specific attributes such as hash files, specific codes, YARA rules that can be used that are much more efficient in identifying those malwares because honestly, it's not a question of whether you're going to be hacked, it's more a question of when you're going to be hacked. And statistically, it's anywhere between 6 and 8 months that malwares can reside within networks undetected. So it's probably there. You just need to write the right tools to catch it.
Yeah, and we did some interviews out at the Wild West Hackin' Fest, and out there they had some great comments. Jonathan Hamm, who I interviewed, said, look, you're going to get this stuff on your network. It's going to happen. And if you can't stop them on the way in, the next best thing to do is catch them on the way out, because they're trying to exfiltrate data, and it's typically a visible thing, so companies can work towards that. Now, I know you guys have done a lot of work in the open source environment and with Oasis, and you're working on creating that standard. How do you find that that's taken up? Are a lot of organizations starting to support that? Are you getting where you see a lot of people that are going with the Stick-Stack-C compatibility?
Yeah, so the Oasis group is doing a great job in collaborating among all the vendors. So all, if not most, of the threat intelligence platforms are participating in this community, and the discussions and the thought behind what will most effectively represent threat intelligence is amazing, because you have people that worked all their life in threat intelligence teams. They understand the idea behind TTP, tactic, techniques, and procedures, behind the idea of indicators of compromise and the relationship. A lot of the discussions we're doing in Stick-Stack-C is around the confidence level of the information and how one source can add more confidence when it's cross-correlated with another. So think about it. If it's like an eyewitness, right? You have someone's watching it, then you have another one watching it. We want the protocol to allow this to aggregate and normalize into a bigger thing, and try to quantify what's the probability of this to happen in your organization. So we have great improvements. Stix1 is already used out there, and Stix2 is being developed to A, support more of those problems that we spoke about, and B, make it easier for the vendors to implement.
Awesome. Now, I know Threat Quotient does a lot more than just contributes to the open source products, right? So can you tell me a little bit about what your company offers beyond that?
Sure. So Threat Quotient is taking a unique approach in the threat intelligence platform space. We're looking at making the threat as much operational and manageable as we can. So we have an on-premise solution. We believe that our solution should be very close into the SIEM and the other sensor grids, what we call, which is basically your firewalls, your IDSs, the endpoints. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a threat intel library, kind of a private library that has only the threat intelligence that is relevant to your specific organization. Then on top of that, we provide a user benchmark, which is a user interface that allows to interact and enrich the indicators. And finally, we have an open exchange API that allows to integrate with ticketing systems, SIEMs. We integrate with all the major SIEMs players, and eventually to push the relevant indicators into the detection and to the protection devices.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the data relevance, right? Because there's a lot of exploits out there for protocols and for programming languages that we may not be running. If I have no PHP code throughout my entire web application, then I don't need to be looking for those types of exploits. I mean, just the existence of PHP would be the vulnerability, I suppose. So it is neat to be able to get that tailored to our environment to make sure that we're being more efficient and being able to respond more quickly, correct?
Right. Yeah, and one other use case that is very helpful to companies that use our product is the patching priorities. So think about it. We are in a constant run and after patching all our assets, and the most logical priorities that we would like to put into patching would be what is the most used exploits are on the wild. Which one of those vulnerabilities are really used by adversaries now? And those are probably the ones you want to reach out first. So to your point, trying to being able to find what are the indicators that are relevant to you. If I don't have any IoT infrastructure, I probably don't care about IoT-based threat intelligence. If I'm more of a Windows shop, probably care more about Windows-based. So the indicators we have, in addition to the enrichment we make, brings a whole set of pictures, almost like a puzzle, that can help you identify, okay, this piece I need to handle first because it's relevant to my assets, it's relevant to my vulnerabilities. This one I can care about less.
All right, now we've talked about, I don't know, probably 8 different things now. And for our viewers out there that want to learn more, we've only got so much time. I know you're giving a talk at 2 o'clock. But for our viewers that want to learn more, where are some of the places they can go if they want to learn more about Oasis or if they want to learn more about threat quotient? What are the best websites to go to?
Yeah, so for the Oasis, which deals with the Sticks and Taxi open source, you can just go to Oasis. I'm not sure what the website is, but you can look them up, or it's just Sticks Taxi 2.0. You can actually participate and see the current draft for Sticks Taxi 2.0. Specifically, if you're interested in threat intelligence platforms, you can look at our website at www.threatquotient.com.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you spending time with us, Nir. And you're going to be giving a talk here in a few minutes. Can you just tell us a little bit about the talk? I don't want you to give it away because you haven't done it yet. But what's the title of your talk, and what are the general concepts you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, my talk title is Beyond a Mystery Nation, and it's about a very relevant subject, by the way. It's about the North Korean hackers. We know there's a tension now between North Korea and the U.S., but for the past few years, the skillful hackers, and just to name a few, we have the Sony hack, we have the Bangladesh bank hack, and it looks like even the WannaCry malware might be related to North Korea. So very interesting talk. I encourage everyone to come and see.
Awesome. Well, that talk is another one of the reasons why you want to come to conferences like these, like BSides Delaware. If you don't have a BSides near you or another security conference, you're really missing out. You'll be able to catch some of this information later on in the recorded form of BSides. So make sure to look forward to that. I'm sure it'll be an excellent talk, and I really appreciate you spending time talking to us.
Thanks you.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up another interview, but stay tuned because we've got more coming at you from BSides Delaware 2017.
All right, so that was definitely another cool interview there, and we're going to switch gears a little bit now. This wasn't a speaker, the next person we talked to, but just kind of a really cool story. So, Don, can you give us a little bit of background about how you met Elaine Wooten and what she's all about?
You know, when I go to these conferences, I get to meet a lot of people, and some of them are people with technology that's really interesting that I want to learn about. Some of them are our viewers, right? We go out and we meet people that have seen the show or know who I am, and so I talk to them, and that's always a great way to learn what all's going on out there. But sometimes it's just random people I've never heard of before that have some kind of story that's really amazing. And typically I talk to them, I hear the story, it's great, and I just keep it to myself. But I met Elaine Wooten there, and she had a story that was so impressive. I got her in front of the camera, and we kind of ran through it. She works for the Department of Homeland Security, and she's I forget what her title was, like a forensic document analyst or something like that. But so she works in IT security. But she was part of a volunteer initiative to be able to help when there were emergencies and FEMA was responding. And so she was actually down here in Florida in the Keys when that last hurricane came through and really did some damage. And so she had this whole story about how they went down there and there was just nothing, no communications, no phone calls in and out, like no way to communicate between the outside world and the Keys. And as the first response team there, how they respond to that, how they react, how they try and get things back and going, get people back on their feet. So we talked to her, and the reason I wanted to make that as part of this show as well is that an overall theme that kind of kept going on at this conference was that they were raising money to help with Puerto Rico, where they had the hurricanes also hit, destroy their infrastructure, and there's still people without power today, and it's been well over a month, and it's going to be like that for weeks to come, where those areas get hit so hard that sometimes we forget how reliant we've become on technology, and it takes a while for that technology to come back after a disaster like that. So it was neat to talk to her about it and get some insight from somebody who had their feet on the ground in that environment.
Yeah, it says here she's a forensic document examiner / researcher, and the group she was with was called the Surge Capacity Force for FEMA. So it was a really interesting story, and we'll take a look at it here. But the part to me about saying just the plane took off and then there's no planes at the airport, just no sound. That's just got to be the weirdest thing. So let's take a listen here to that interview with Don and Elaine.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another ITProTV interview coming at you live from BSides Delaware. I'm Don Pizzette, and I know I've said it before that one of the greatest things about coming to a conference like this is getting to meet neat people with an interesting story and learn new things. And I had a chance to run into Elaine earlier, who had just an amazing story that I want to share with you guys. Elaine, first off, thanks for joining us, and thank you for spending time with us.
Oh, glad to be here.
And your story, I'll give a little lead in, but I wanted you to run with this because you did a great job telling it. But you recently took a 45-day vacation down to the Keys in Florida, but it's a little more than that. Why don't you give me a little setup here? What were you doing down there?
Yeah, certainly. I took the opportunity, because I work for the government, to do this thing called the Surge Capacity Force, which means that basically I had volunteered, if there was a disaster, to show up. And there was a hurricane called Harvey, and everybody volunteered because Harvey was terrible. And by the time I got to Alabama to do the training to go to Harvey, Irma was coming. And so I ended up deploying to the Florida Keys for about 40 days, doing disaster, basically enrolling people to help them get assistance from FEMA. But a lot of that is letting people tell their stories and really being in the middle of a disaster.
Now, our studios are in Gainesville, Florida, and we got hit by Hurricane Irma. Our studios, I think we were shut down for 2 days. It really wasn't that significant for us. We were very far inland. But the Keys, it's a very different story. So tell me a little bit about what it was like when you first got your feet on the ground. What did it look like?
Yeah, well, let me back up and explain how we got there, because it was a little bit unusual. We were waiting out the storm in Tallahassee, and we had made little teams. We didn't know each other. 6 of us sitting at a table together. We decided we'd be a team. And somebody came over, somebody in charge, and asked whether we'd be willing to go into Key West, whether we'd be willing to rotor in, because there was no communication, because there were no phones, and there apparently were no radios. Satellite phones weren't really working. And I guess we were all a little crazy, because we said yes. And so we got on a bus, and we went to Orlando, where we caught a Coast Guard plane that took us into Key West. In Key West, there was no power, and no water, and no communication, no internet, no nothing. And nobody knew what the situation was, so we went in with security, with officers with rifles and bulletproof vests to protect us. We went in on a plane with, it was us, 6 people acting as FEMA, and a field hospital crew from Hawaii, and urban search and rescue crew, and then our protection group. And when we got there, nobody knew we were coming, because there's no communication. So we landed at Key West International. I don't know if you guys have been there, but imagine it with no planes and no people and no power and no nothing. So the plane landed, and we got off, and there was nobody there. And we went looking for shade. So we found a little bit of shade, and then we waited. After about an hour, the planes left, which was the eeriest thing ever. So basically, we did connect with the city, and the city had commandeered some hotel rooms and got us in there and gave us some Priuses. So we need thumbs up for electric cars. And we started to drive around the city and assess the damage. And that was the first part of it. Key West was not as bad as other places. It was horrific. Many of the roads were blocked. Power lines were down everywhere. There was sand everywhere, dirt everywhere, trees everywhere. But Key West wasn't as bad as other parts. And we did end up going to the places which were really bad later on.
So when you went in, your first goal was just to assess, to figure out how much damage there was and come up with is that where you start coming up with a game plan of what to do?
Right. So the first mission when FEMA goes in is this thing called AIR, which is basically just assessing what the damage is. And then the next thing is to try to get people set up to get assistance. And so we couldn't do the assistance part because there was no communication. There was no internet. And this is where the technology comes into play. All of the signing people up for things is using iPads and using computers. There was no internet. There was no way to sign anybody up for anything. What ended up happening then in Puerto Rico when Maria hit Puerto Rico was they started people filling things out on paper. And obviously that doesn't work, right? There's just a lag time. Somebody has to key it in. It's not going to happen. So we were sort of stuck for the first couple of days. But we did drive around Key West and look for damage. And it was bad, but the thing that surprised us was the most. We went into a mobile home park, and there was very little damage, actually, but there were, I think, 4 or 5 trailers that were completely destroyed, and those were hit by tornadoes. So Hurricane Irma spawned these little micro tornadoes that literally would destroy just a part of a house. So you'd have both ends, and just the middle would be gone. So that was the first part of it. And then FEMA sent in a satellite truck for us once the roads were open, and we started to sign people up to get help, which was great. It was the best feeling ever, ever, ever to be able to help people and give them hope.
And that help, that takes several different forms, right? That you reinstate some basic communication, but there's also a lot of personal assistance, right?
Right, yeah, and people are really confused about this because they're like, where's FEMA? I'm like, okay, so the state and local police from other jurisdictions are here helping you. That's FEMA, right? All the things that are there to recover after the hurricane, that's FEMA. It just doesn't say FEMA, so people don't know that. The one thing people do think is that FEMA comes and collects all the debris along the road. So when we would be driving around, people say, when are you going to clear the debris? And we're like, never. We're not going to, but we'll, FEMA gives the state and locals the money to do that. Now, the personal stuff is that every household gets to register for assistance. And they do things like they prepay hotel rooms if your home is destroyed. The thing that they did in Key West and the lower Keys, because people were without work and without power, is they put a small amount of money in basically everybody's bank account. So when the grocery stores opened and the pharmacy opened, people could buy stuff. So it was really important that we got people registered, because as soon as we hit register, that money went into their bank accounts.
Now, I know the damage there was pretty significant, and the money certainly helps with that, but it takes a while to get infrastructure back up and going. If I have money and I go to the store and the store's still closed, that doesn't necessarily help. And you mentioned you were there 40 days. Now, was that infrastructure was back up and going at that point? You achieved a mission goal, or was that just your time limit for being there?
Well, it was time for me to go because it was a 45-day deployment, but the infrastructure in Key West came back pretty quickly. The hotel we stayed in, where the rooms were all pretty much commandeered, housed the electric linemen who were there to repair stuff. And I'll do a shout out to the Michaels in Wisconsin, who was the crew that was there, and they got the power back up to most of the lower Keys within 10 days. Unbelievable. But the hotel was completely filled with their workers and the six of us. That was pretty amazing. To fill in the gap, the U.S. military they flew in Chinook helicopters with MREs and water. They literally landed in the parking lot of the Publix grocery store. I have an amazing picture where there's nothing. There are no cars, there's no people, there's no nothing. There's just this helicopter landing, and they start shoving these pallets of MREs out, and then they leave because they don't want to deal with the people, and actually everybody was pretty well behaved. By the next day, they've got crowd control management in place, and that's part of the infrastructure. It's not just the infrastructure of the power and getting the grocery store open, it's what's the infrastructure for doing disaster relief. So they were pretty quick to get that to work.
As a Floridian, I've had the chance to witness this before. I've actually seen the helicopters drop off the pallets of water, and I remember the first time I saw it, I was so amazed because they were all cans that had the Anheuser-Busch logo on them. And I thought to myself, are they dropping off beer? But the Anheuser-Busch bottling plant had switched to canning water. And you get so much cooperation, all these different organizations. And when you have a state like Florida, they are by and large prepared for emergencies like this. That we have organizations like FEMA. That's not true everywhere, right? We're getting a lot of information out of Puerto Rico right now that was hit and is significantly worse off and taking longer to recover.
Yeah. Puerto Rico is a lot more of a challenge. And I, just as a person, not representing FEMA in any way, but I looked at the situation and I was like, why is it like this? And part of the reason is that within the contiguous U.S., there's this thing called it's called mutual assistance agreements. Basically, when there's a snowstorm in Wisconsin, the power crews from Florida go and help. And when there's a hurricane, the power crews from Wisconsin go and help. And all the states have this. Well, Puerto Rico doesn't have that to offer. They're not going to fly their electric linemen out, and so nobody else is going to fly their electric linemen in. So that's a huge part of the disadvantage of Puerto Rico, is that they're not part of that ongoing relationship, which is too bad, because once you get the power back on, once the keys got the power back on, there's a lot of potential. You can get groceries again and put them in your, well, you can't put them in your refrigerator because all of the appliances were out on the street. All of people's belongings were out on the street, but at least you can get some ice and, you know.
Yeah, and I try to remind people that a lot of people reached out to us before Hurricane Irma came through because we were right in the path of it, and I told people don't worry about us. We're prepared. We're taken care of. We're not the problem. Worry about the areas that aren't prepared. The hurricanes that hit Texas, the flooding there, that was devastating because that doesn't normally happen to them. Stuff normally happens to us. We're kind of used to it. Puerto Rico, I want to throw out a mention here, Hackers for Charity, who I've interviewed. They're actually here at the conference with us. They are raising money right now to be able to send as assistance over to Puerto Rico to help, at a minimum, reestablish communications. And it's shocking to think about how that damage is affecting them, that the schools aren't open, so the kids are missing months of school. That can set your education back. That affects your whole life, and that kind of stuff is going on right now. So I'm thankful to have people like yourself that are willing to drop everything you're doing, head down to these areas, help out, reestablish communications, and there's a personal risk there, so it is dangerous, but at the end of the day, you're helping people, and that's one of the greatest things that we can do. So thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah, glad to do it. It was the best experience of my life. Absolutely, hands down, best experience of my life. So if you have a chance to go to a disaster area and help people, the only negative I'll say is when you come home, you kind of have a withdrawal, right? Because you're used to every person you go up to, you're bringing light to them, you're bringing hope to them, and then you come home and it's like, what?
Get out of my way.
Yeah. So you should. It's not really like PTSD, but it's definitely withdrawal from that feeling that you get from helping people. Yeah, but people should go. Definitely.
Was that the first disaster you had responded to, or have you done this before?
No, that was the first one. Yeah, and it was great.
Are you still signed up to do another one?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I signed up to go to Puerto Rico. They don't really need us, I don't think, because they hired local people, which is great. FEMA hired a bunch of local people to do the kinds of things we were doing. So hopefully that pumps money in the economy. But next disaster, I signed up through the end of next year. So we'll see. After that, I'm not sure, but yeah, I'll go again. And they're 45-day deployments, so it's a big chunk of time, but it's worth it.
And you said that the name of that operation, for anybody who wants to learn more about it, it was the Surge. What was it called?
Yeah, if you're a federal employee with the U.S. government, you can apply for this thing called Surge Capacity Force, and you have to do about 20 hours of FEMA online training, and your supervisor has to certify that you did it, and then you're just on that list. And when there's a disaster, they send out an email and ask, who wants to go. And most of the people were Homeland Security people, but I met a woman who was an SEC attorney, so it can be anybody.
Everybody can help.
Yep.
So if you want to learn more about that, make sure you look for it. That is an important component of our government working for us and just people helping people, which is what it's all about. All right, well, Elaine, I really appreciate you spending time with us. Before we wrap up, do you have any parting words for our viewers?
Not really, except if you can help this thing for Puerto Rico, really. Any way you can help Puerto Rico right now, please do it.
Awesome. Thanks again. And thank you guys for watching. That's going to wrap up this interview, but be sure to stay tuned because we have more interviews coming at you live here from BSides Delaware 2017.
All right, another great interview there, and it's kind of cool to shift gears there. I know it really didn't have much to do with the conference and what was going on, but just anytime you can hear a cool story like that. And that's one of the fun things about going to these conferences, just meeting people and networking and hearing stories like that. So I'm glad you had a good time up in Delaware.
Yeah, and the main charity that they were supporting there was Hackers. It was Hackers for Charity.
So the
right?
conference as a whole is supporting a charity?
It was several of the sponsors that were doing it, and I think the conference was sending some of their T-shirt money over. There were a couple of different tie-ins there, but if you want to learn more about it, do a Google search for Hackers for Charity. They've been at several of the other conferences as well, raising money, trying to help out in various areas. So that's one of the ones you want to learn about.
So it's not hacking charities.
Right.
Okay, good. That's important to note. That is not who we're supporting in this case. But so thank you very much for watching, everybody. Thanks, Don, like I said, for going up to B-Sides. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast here if you haven't done so already. Review it, share it, tell a friend. We'd love to help grow this audience a little bit. But for now, that's going to wrap it up. So we'll see you next time here on the ITProTV podcast. Take it easy.